Hello and welcome to the Landing in Japan podcast, where we talk to the people in the know about living, working, and traveling in Japan. Whether you're a tourist planning a trip for the first time or a professional looking at starting a business in Japan, thank you so much for tuning in.
Join us as we explore the many regions of this fascinating country and take a deep dive into its people and culture.
Your hosts are me, Sam Barker, and my welcome co-host, Gerard O'Sullivan.
Great to be here, Sam, on this stormy day in Himeji, Japan. And without further ado, let's introduce our guest today. We have Josh Grisdale from TabiFolk and Accessible Japan.
Welcome to the show, Josh.
Hello, it's great to be here.
Fantastic. Josh, we're so happy to have you joining us today. To kick things off, could you just talk a little bit about your background and why you came to Japan?
Sure. So I'm originally from Canada, and there's something, I guess a lot of people will be listening to this on audio, something about myself that you probably cannot see or easily is that I have a disability. So I have what's called cerebral palsy. It's basically damage that happens to your brain around the time that you're born. And so because of that, the signals from my brain don't correctly go to the muscles to move them the way I want to. And so I've been using a wheelchair since, well, pretty much since the time I was born. I used sort of a baby carriage when I was younger up until about 3 or 4. And then from about 4 on, I've been using a power wheelchair to get around. So I'm from Toronto area in Canada, but I moved out to the country when I was about 4 years old. So I lived in the middle of nowhere on a small sheep farm. My dad worked for IBM, so it wasn't like we were farmers for our main living. But so I lived in a small town, and when I went to high school there was actually a Japanese class, and because I wanted to get into IT when I got older, and I thought that it's a very competitive field. So if I could speak 2 languages, particularly Japanese, that'd be something that would help me get ahead in my career. Maybe land a good job where I was traveling internationally or something like that. So that was the reason I started taking Japanese. My Japanese teacher was actually not Japanese. He was Canadian. He had lived in Japan for a number of years, and because of the school board requirements, he had to teach 2. He had to have 2 teachables, as they called it. And so he taught the auto mechanic shop. So he needed 1 more. And since he had lived in Japan for a while and spoke Japanese, he thought, oh, I'll offer a class in Japanese. And so the school board okayed it. And it was a very relaxed class. It was a lot the same way that he taught the automotive class. So there's barely any homework or tests or anything like that, which is good. Probably kids, if I had been very strict, I might have given up on that. But the one thing he really did well was that he alluded to a lot as well, of course. The one thing that really sort of stuck with me most was that every Friday we'd have, we called it Bunga Friday, so Culture Friday. So we'd eat cookies from the cafeteria, and we'd watch either old Kurosawa movies or the latest dramas that he questionably obtained. And so I got to see a lot of Japanese culture, and because I got an interest in Japan, and so I started looking up more stuff about Japan, and I decided that I wanted to come here after I graduated high school just for a vacation or something. Unfortunately, at the time, there's not really much information about accessibility anywhere for terms of travel in general, but particularly Japan. So even if you had the Lonely Planet guidebook, if there was anything in it, it'd maybe be a page at the very end of the book saying that it's very difficult to get around in a wheelchair or something like that. So it was kind of discouraging. But this was back in 2000. So while there was internet, we're still at dial-up on internet at our home, and there wasn't a lot of travel blogs about visiting Japan or anything like that. So I didn't have much information. But my parents always taught us that it's important to try things and to take challenge. Even if it doesn't work out, then it's gonna be a good experience and you learn something from it. So even though we didn't have much information, my parents really wanted me to come into going to Japan and try. So I came here in 2000 with my father for about 3 to 4 weeks, I guess it was. And I was really, really surprised. I found that things were a lot more accessible than I had expected. I'd seen a lot of those television dramas, and they were all like, in these small restaurants, and there's tons of stairs everywhere. So
Yeah.
crowded trains, and people rushing and pushing onto trains like that. So that was the image I had of Japan. So I was surprised when I was actually able to do a lot more than I thought I would be able to do, and it really helped me discover that I really quite liked Japan. But also it was a place that I felt that I could uh, go to, and I could come back again and explore more. So I did, and I came back a couple times. And every time I came back, I was pleasantly surprised at how the accessibility had changed in those few years between trips. Maybe if you were here at the time, you'd feel it was slow, but coming back every 2 years, every 3 years, or something like that, you can really see the changes much more recognizably. And so, like places I wasn't able to go to before, I was able to go to, or train stations I couldn't use before, I was able to use. And so I was really impressive, and I decided that I wanted to come and try living here in Japan. So I moved here in 2007, and I've been working in Tokyo since then. And I became a citizen in 2016. I started running a website called Accessible Japan as well. So that's me in a nutshell, I guess.
Yeah,
Wow,
it
that's amazing.
makes complete sense. And I know, Josh, we were having a chat before the recording, and just in general, I think something that's really important is this idea that accessibility is a net benefit. Obviously, it's something you're really passionate about. But it's good for everyone. It's good for all different kinds of people. There's Japan's an aging society. You've got people with invisible disabilities. So could you just talk a little bit more about that? Because I know it's a topic you're obviously very knowledgeable about, but it touches on a lot of different people who might want to come to Japan or might want to live in Japan.
Yeah. So just a little bit about, so I run a website called Accessible Japan. It's sort of basically the guide that I wish I had back in 2000. The guide that would tell me that I could come to Japan, and then give me the information I need to not worry about things, but to just get to enjoy planning for it. So through that, I tell people about what the accessibility is like in Japan. So if you have a disability, or aging, or maybe you're traveling with an injury, or you have a young child, that can be a very useful resource, I feel. But yeah, so I feel that, actually I have a couple stories, I guess. The first one the other day, I was at the 7-Eleven, and I noticed a new sticker on the counter. And the sticker had, sort of a number of symbols with Japanese and English written on it. It said like fork, ohashi, so chopsticks, heat up and microwave, yes, no. And there's also a symbol that said, I have a hearing disability. So it was designed so that the person who was making the purchases could, indicate to the staff by pointing, only like saying, because people maybe haven't come to Japan yet, don't know that when you go to the convenience store, it's not so much just you pass them the things and you pay them the money and you go. There's a lot of interaction and back and forth of, do you want a fork or chopsticks with this? Do you want a bag?
You want a bag?
Do you want to heat it up? Yeah. And so all these questions to get asked. And so if somebody maybe has a hearing impairment, that can be a very, maybe possibly daunting thing, or something that they don't want to deal with, or maybe, they have some other disability where communication is a bit more of a challenge, and so they can use that to communicate. But there's also the other benefit is that for people who don't speak Japanese, I remember when I came with my dad for the first time, he didn't speak any Japanese. I spoke very, very basic Japanese. So I never really know what I was being asked a lot of times, and so there's a lot of gestures and hand waving and stuff like that going back and forth. And it took up a lot of time for the staff as well as frustration and stress for everybody. So having the sticker there, it also helps people who are guests to Japan and don't have that much of a Japanese language ability, so that they can also just say yes or no, I want a fork, do you want to heat up, and or the staff could point as, do you want a fork, and they could just say yes or no or whatever. So that, I think, one of the ways it highlights that something about for possibly made for people with hearing impairments, or maybe anxiety, or some other disability, could also benefit people who are foreign visitors without a disability. Another one is that a place I go to fairly often is Sensoji, which is the major temple in Tokyo. And a number of years back, when you visit a temple, usually there's a main gate that you come in, and there's a few steps up and down to it. And then when you're in the main grounds, there's a lot of gravel. And then the main building usually has a number of steps to go up into it. Well, a number of years back, Denso decided to make that flat. So they built up the earth around the main gate. So it sort of became flat, so there wasn't the steps. So people could go through no problem, without needing to go up and down steps. They got rid of the gravel as much as possible, made all the flooring quite flat. And they also even added an elevator into the main temple building, which is quite unique, especially at that time. And they did a really, really good job of it. I always want to praise them for it because they made it look like the temple building itself in terms of the structure. So it blends in. They did such a good job of it that they actually had to put signs on it that this is an elevator because nobody knew what the elevator was because they did such a good job. But they wasn't necessarily, for people with disabilities and wheelchairs. Originally, of course, they become tourist attractions, but temples and shrines are part of people's everyday life here in Japan. In the way that maybe like a church or a mosque might be. And so they wanted the people who part of the community they wanted to go and give the prayers in the temple to be able to get in and do that. And so that means, of course, people have difficulty doing steps, and that could be somebody who is elderly, or it could be somebody who has a young family and pushing a baby stroller. And then the other day, even when I was there, I had to wait for the elevator because now there's a bunch of people with disabilities there, but there's an elderly lady getting off, and when I got to the top, there's a young father with a baby carriage as well. So that was one thing. And the last one, if I can, was actually it's a New Zealand story for you, but I went to the New Zealand embassy. And they were all excited. We had some connections for work, and I went there, and they were all excited because they just put in a ramp at the front main entrance. They were all really excited because they wanted me to be the first person to use the ramp, and then we're going to take a picture of it. And the thing is, though, before we got to take the picture of it, there was the guy pushing the delivery truck packages.
That's funny.
And he had all his packages on a dolly, and he was going up and down the ramp, and he said it was so much easier than it was before because there's only steps before. So I think that again highlights that building an accessible environment can help in everybody's daily life. So.
Yeah, and it's a very good point that it's one the delivery driver and also for the staff at the convenience store. It's also good for business, even if it's put in for accessibility reasons. It just makes business move smoother.
Exactly, and it can increase your customers' pay. There's a number of places that have been putting in ramps or making their facilities accessible, and that just means that more people can go and spend their money there.
I mean, me and Gerard will often talk to people on this podcast, people who are from parts of Japan that are trying to encourage tourism. They really want people go to Tokyo, Kyoto, Osaka. They want people to go further afield. But one of the ways you can do that is by making it more accessible. To everyone, making it language-wise, as you said, Josh, but also physically. There's lots of elements here.
And letting people know about it too. In PR, it's really, really important to show diversity of people. I think just seeing somebody with a disability in a picture. I went to Shimane and for the Izumo shrine there. On the main pictures on the website, there's a picture that had a ramp going up to one of the buildings, and just seeing that immediately let me know, oh, hey, that's the place I can go, without needing to talk at length about accessibility. Just even that simple picture said, oh, I can go there and I can enjoy myself.
Josh, you mentioned before, and it's something that we kind of had on our list of just topics we really wanted to catch you on, but you're a Japanese citizen. We speak to a lot of people that have been in Japan for a long time, been back and forth in Japan multiple times. Having a Japanese citizen is quite rare. So honestly, could you just talk a little bit about that, about the process, and about why you became a Japanese citizen?
Sure. So I always joke that I'm a 43-year-old man in a 8-year-old Japanese boy's body. or I guess the other way around. I'm an 8-year-old Japanese boy in a 43-year-old
Yeah,
man's body.
that's funny.
Yeah, so I guess I've been in Japan for about 7 or 8 years at that point. I decided, actually, one of my coworkers, she's from China. She became a Japanese citizen. It was something that, always heard that it's possible. It's sort of like one of the things, like you can become a Japanese citizen, but nobody's ever met one that became Japanese. And so that's sort of always the joke about it. But so yeah, talking to my coworker, and she told me a bit about the process, and I started looking things up, and so I really want to, you know, spend the rest of my life in Japan. And at that point, I was on a work visa. So there's always the uncertainty of how long you actually be able to be there, because I could lose my job, or my company could go under, or I might want to change a job, and in that process, not be able to find something and have my visa run out, or like it can be kind of difficult to feel settled when that's something. It's always a concern for you. And the other part of it is that I not only want to just live here, but I also want to be part of daily life, in terms of, because I felt that my future was going to be here, so being a part of that would be that I wanted to have a voice in my future.
Yeah,
so I want to be able to
voting and such, right? Political engagement.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, I was going through a bunch. I was looking for a lost key the other day, and I was going through a bunch of files and documents, and I found the envelope for my first voting ticket that I got here in Japan, and I kept it because sort of a keepsake, because I wanted to remember that, and nobody could understand how excited I was the first day I got to vote. But yeah, so I really wanted to be involved at that level. So there's actually a website called turningjapanese.info. I think it's .info. If you look up Turning Japanese, there's a website about it, run by a former American who is a Japanese citizen, and he has a bunch of stories and what to do and stuff like that. So basically, you need to go to the Ministry of Legal Affairs, and I think you need to appointment first. But there's a place you can go to, and you sort of have an initial meeting. You get a caseworker, and they'll sort of help, first of all, figure out what you need to do if you, first of all, meet the requirements, and then what you need to do for the next step, because it can depend on what country you're coming from. So, for example, in Japan, you have a family registrar, register with your parents and your family members and stuff like that, all in a document. So if you're from China or Korea, then you already have that in a way. So because they have that system as well, so they can just sort of get translated, bring that over. That's the only thing they need to do for that part of it. But for Canadians, we don't have that system. So I had to get translations of both my parents' birth certificates, their marriage certificate, the birth certificates myself, as well as my sister's, and then all had them legally translated by like a legal, and then notarized that they were properly translated. So that was one of the extra ones for people from Canada. So that's why you start going the first time and try to figure out what it is you're going to need to prepare for your actual application. And so that person's initial job is sort of basically to help you through the application process to get everything in line. And so you need things like you have to write a letter about your motivation for becoming a citizen. You have to show that you're financially independent, stuff like that. So it's actually not that steep of a requirement. It's like, I think that's only five different things to this. It's like you have to be over 18, you have to have no criminal record, you have to show that you're independent, that you promise that you're not going to overthrow the government. And that's not a joke. You have to actually sign something that says that. And I think there's one more thing. I'm not sure what it was exactly, but it's actually not that. I only have to be willing to give up other citizenships, but yeah. So after you get the things all in order, then they accept your application, And from my understanding, it's like when they accept your application, it's sort of like a well, they only accept applications that are going to get accepted in the end. But then it sort of becomes a waiting process. And not all of them, of course, if they find something that's suspicious or odd or something like that. But even partway through, I think there's some taxes I hadn't paid, and they just let me know that, and so I went and paid, and then sent I paid the tax. So is still rather lenient in that form as well. The my secondary caseworker. So once you've actually applied, he did actually come in and check my house. So
Interesting.
it's like a 2-minute check. But basically they want to confirm that you're living where you say you're living, and that you are actually living there. So they check to make sure there's like shoes in your in your Genkan, that there's like bed and clothing and stuff like that, or whatever. So people aren't just making up a fake address or something like that. They can apparently talk to your neighbors as well. So I don't know if they talk to my neighbors or not. But and then you wait and you wait and you wait. I waited for about a year, I guess it was.
Wow.
And
A
there's a
whole
thing
year.
called the long one. You have to let people know you have to let them know every time you leave the government. Or sorry, every time you leave the country, because they can't give somebody a citizenship if they're not in the country. So yeah, and so there's a thing called Kampo, which is like the official government gazette, and so they list all the government, if you register a company or something like that, those kind of things get listed. But if you become a citizen, your name gets listed as well as your
Wow.
your birthday and your address. I'm not sure too happy about, but anyways, but so every morning I check the PDFs for that, and so one day I saw that it was my name was in there. I got really excited, so I went and there's a
Wow.
I thought there was gonna be like a ceremony because we had to go to so it was a event at thing at the Ministry of Affairs. And so I got my suit on, and I was expecting the thing you always see in the movies of people becoming American citizens,
Yeah.
and somebody giving a rousing speech and everybody hugging each other, and and it was basically like a information session. Okay, so next year you go, you give your forms. Then next thing you're gonna have to go to your Kuyakso, and you're gonna have to put this form in there, and it was and that's all it was. I said like. And there's some guy in sweatpants sitting next to me. I felt a little bit embarrassed out dressing up that much, but for me it was a special day. But
Oh. So
I had to give
the
up
other
my
part
Canadian citizenship.
yeah, that's the question I was going to reach for is so was that a hard decision to give up your Canadian citizenship to become a Japanese citizen? Is there any problems from that?
Like it was a strange feeling, I guess. And for myself, I knew that this is what I wanted to do, and that would have to be one of the things I'd have to sacrifice because Japan doesn't allow dual citizenship. So you have to give up your other citizenships. And so, but I mean, it's something I knew I agreed to do, so I was going to do it. So it did feel awkward. It feels weird to get a visa every time I go back to visit my family. But I thought that in this modern day and age, we can connect really easily. I can still go back within a day if I need to. Get a flight and get back to Canada pretty quickly. We're connected all the time. So if it was maybe 30, 40 years ago, it'd probably be much more of a different feeling, probably. But yeah, it's something I wanted to do. My family didn't oppose it. They were sad. They didn't want me to, but they didn't want to stop me from that. So my mom always joked that she wanted to raise me to be independent, but she did too good of a job. She didn't want me to be that independent. So
that's funny.
But yeah, it's everybody's it's supportive and stuff like that. So,
so if
sorry, Joe, go ahead.
I was just a silly question. So if Canada plays Japan, do you support Japan or Canada at sports?
Yeah, so during the Olympics, yeah, so that's something. So if it's Canada only, but Japan's not there, I'll support Canada. If it's Japan only, I support Japan. If it's Japan versus Canada, I support Japan. These are
Oh,
the rule
you
I make
really
for
have
myself.
gone all the way.
Yeah,
It's
I don't
funny.
watch sports anyway, so it's not so much of not a problem. But yeah.
So just to bring things full circle, I'd just like to bring things back to accessibility again, and in this spirit of, like you said, citizenship, political engagement. What are some of the things that Japan could really improve on when it comes to accessibility, from your perspective?
Yeah, I think there's some challenges that sort of maybe in this are sort of ingrained in Japan that will take some time, I think, to work out. One of the things is that my inclusive education isn't as prominent here as in other places. So that means a lot of times people with disabilities will go to a different school than people who are not disabled. And so that sort of can have the double negative effect of that then people without disabilities don't get much exposure to people who have disabilities. So I was giving a talk once and at the very end there's sort of a question and answer period. And there's a 50, 60-year-old man. And the question he asked, I thought we talked about some technical things about accessible travel and everything. And I thought he was going to ask maybe something about something really deep or something like that. And the question he asked is, how do I speak to somebody with a disability? And it sort of blew my mind a little bit because here he was probably 50, 60 years old and he'd never really talked to somebody with a disability, which, there's about 15% of the world population that has a disability. So that he had never really had the opportunity or taken the opportunity to speak with someone with a disability, really indicated to me that a lot of ways people with disabilities aren't as integrated into society as they possibly could be. So I think that can, in the maybe tourism industry as well, can lead to overlooking the fact that people with disabilities or elderly people also want to travel and have the means to travel as well. And so, accessibility can be an afterthought. I look at a lot of, websites for different places, and maybe they don't usually have much information on accessibility, but sometimes they'll have information on accessibility on the Japanese side of the website. And I changed it over to English to have a look at it, and that accessibility page will just completely missing because I guess they just felt in the list of priorities that that wasn't something that didn't need to be translated because maybe they didn't think people with foreigners with disabilities would be traveling or something like that. So so I think that is something that can be changed. I think it's a worldwide thing as well, but just in general for information about accessibility, it could really be a lot more prevalent, I think, and really that's all that a lot of people need is just to know what is available in terms of accessibility at places, so then they can make an informed decision of whether they want to use their time to go to that place or not, or whether they can or not. And so that's something I think that Japan could really, really work on, and I'm happy to help everybody here do that. So that's one of my maybe things I want to do as a citizen here.
And what
makes
about
complete sense.
Yeah, and what about accommodation issues? Is there enough? That's something I hear a lot, that there's not that many rooms that are accessible in hotels in Japan.
Right now, from what I remember, the last number I saw was about of the hotel rooms available in Japan, only 0.4% are accessible.
Wow.
So that's not 0.4% of all the hotels, but it's like of all the hotel rooms available. That's partly because of the requirements up until now from the government were that any hotel with fewer than 50 rooms were exempt from having an accessible room.
Oh, how interesting.
And any hotel with over 50 rooms is only required to actually have one room. So it could be a hotel with 600 rooms, but they're only required to have one room. With the Olympics and Paralympics, they changed that to 1%. So if they have 300 rooms, they have to have 3 accessible rooms. But that was only it's not retroactive, so that means that only new hotels, or if they're doing major renovations, then they would need to follow those rules. But even then, I still think it's enough. Like I think in the UK, it's something like 5 to 6% of the rooms are required to be accessible, and in the States, something similar to that. So, you know, if you have 15% of the world population with a disability, it'll be a little bit higher than 1%, I think. But so it's definitely a challenge trying to find places.
Yeah, I mean, it's like you said, definitely something that it is in Japan's interest. You know, as an aging society, you know, these kind of issues are only going to get more prevalent for them. So getting ahead of the curve is probably the best idea. Amazing. Well, Josh, we tend to kind of finish things on a little bit of a fun note, but thank you so much for such a wide-ranging discussion. There's so many different elements to it.
My pleasure.
Just for like 30 seconds, real quick, is there one particular word or phrase or something that kind of defines you or defines your life in Japan, or just that you really like? Just any kind of little language phrase or, like I say, word or something in Japanese that really sticks with you.
Okay, well, continuing on the theme, I guess then we'll use barrier free, or barrier free. So in Japan,
yes, okay,
yeah. So in Japan, they don't use the word accessibility really. So actually, that's another issue, because that people are from English-speaking countries are looking up accessible hotel room or accessibility, stuff like that. But because everybody's using the words barrier free, even when they translate to English, a lot of times it's sort of like a hit and miss in results. But so yeah, barrier free is the word used here in Japan for accessibility. So if that's something that's important to you, then definitely a word to remember and take with you.
Yeah, and fantastic.
And I've got a question for you. As a long-term resident of Tokyo, and you know, as an accessibility advocate, can you give us your favorite or top restaurant recommendation that is accessible?
There's all be places by where I live, but it's a nice. Maybe I can give a tip, and that would be that in Japan, you know, it can be quite, especially in Tokyo, it can be difficult to find places that are accessible because of just the way the buildings are built here up to the moment. But there are actually a lot of. I always recommend, if you're just looking for something, to actually go to a department store. That's something that's unusual in other parts of the world, because you don't, you know, think of a department store as having dining options or something like that. But a lot of the shopping, like department stores like Takashimaya or something like that, on the top floors they'll have a number of different restaurants, and some of them are actually quite good restaurants as well. And just because of the building, they tend to be more accessible than other places. So it's sort of the easiest way to recommend someone to likely find something they want to eat that can also be accessible. So
that's a great tip.
My go-to whenever I'm
yeah, great tip. Thank you, Josh.
Well, yeah, Josh, thank you so much for your time today. It's been a really great chat. Josh Grisdale on LinkedIn. Is anything you want to just quickly shout out, Josh, right at the end before we finish?
Yeah, you can find me on pretty much all the social networks as Josh Grisdale, or my first name is Barry, so it's Barry Joshua Grisdale on LinkedIn. But for the other ones, it's usually just Josh Grisdale, so you'll probably find me that way. And always eager to chat about accessibility in Japan.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone. And thank you, Josh, once again.
Thanks, Josh.